So good evening, everyone. Tonight we're going to hear about how to buy a car with AAA Mid-Atlantic Virginia spokesperson Morgan Dean. I'm Lorraine Moffa, Programming Coordinator for Loudoun County Public Library, and it's our pleasure to host the program. If you have any questions or comments during the presentation, please type them in the chat box or raise your hand if you want to ask the question directly. And with that, here's Morgan Dean.
All right. Thank you very much, Lorraine. My apologies to everybody tonight. My camera seems to be lagging just a little bit, so you may see it lock up just a little bit. That's okay, though. I'm going to have a presentation up on screen there. May have something to do with my kids getting home. They tell me they're doing their homework, but I have a feeling it's probably some heavy gaming going on around the corner. So we will have to wait and see, but the presentation is all ready to go. As Lorraine mentioned, thank you very much for that introduction. My name is Morgan Dean. I'm with AAA Mid-Atlantic. I serve as the public and government affairs person, which ultimately ends up meaning I wear a lot of hats around there, all good ones. I serve as spokesperson for the membership organization across much of Virginia. We have a separate club that takes care of Tidewater, but I do Richmond, Roanoke, Charlottesville, Harrisonburg, up to Loudoun County, kind of all across the state of Virginia, other than that little section down in the Tidewater area. So I serve as spokesperson. I also do some work down at the state capitol with traffic safety issues. AAA's very, very closely been following everything that's happened with cannabis this year, working to make sure that there are traffic safety campaigns surrounding legalization of cannabis. We also work down on slow down, move over laws and some other things. I also get to oversee AAA school safety patrol programs across the state and occasionally do swearing-ins and meet with the students and talk with them about the history of the program. So it's a lot of great things that I get to do with AAA, including speaking to different organizations like I'm getting to do tonight. So thank you very much for the invite. Let's talk about how to buy a car. I would not pretend to be the expert on every single aspect of it, but I can take you through some of the things that we at AAA get asked an awful lot. No two situations are exactly alike, though. So take some of what I say as a grain of salt if it doesn't quite work for you, but hopefully there's a lot of information that can be gleaned from all of that. So how to buy a car? Boy, is that a loaded question, because there are many things that come along with that, especially in this day and age. So let's talk a little bit about that. Does car buying look like it did back in 2019? Probably not for most people. So kind of forget what you did pre-pandemic. The old days of going in there, having the sit down and the back and forth may not be the same way that you remember it. Car buying is still a bit of the same thing, but maybe not all the negotiations and everything else you remember. Will it come back? Maybe in the future, but for right now, we're still in a different place. Dealerships are starting to build their inventory back up, but you may not find exactly what you want, be it the model, be it the accessories you want on that model. If you're looking for a specific color, that may even be harder to find, but there are getting to be vehicles out there. Many automakers only making vehicles with the kind of high-end trim and add-ons. They bring the most amount of money when you're talking about using some of the chips. Really, a lot of what we've seen over the past 2 years with the sales of cars and the shortage and the demand and the higher prices has come down to the chip shortage. So when they do get chips, they're probably putting them in some more of the high-end type vehicles. That's why it may be harder to find some of the economy vehicles, the smaller vehicles that don't bring in as much profit as some of the bigger, more expensive luxury top trim vehicles. The chip shortage is still an issue, but getting better. There are still supply chain issues that are affecting car parts and other things. So all of those together have created some unusual demand, which has led to some higher prices out there. So some headlines and statistics as we're starting to take a look at where vehicles are and what the purchasing looks like. More and more purchases being made online. I don't think anybody's surprised by that. As much as virtual has taken over and what we've seen happen with online slipping into so many aspects of life. In 2019, less than 1% of vehicles were sold online. That's now up closer to 10%. It's expected to grow in the future with 40% of vehicle purchases to be digital by 2025. So we're talking a couple of years away. An awful lot of those purchases are going to be done online. Seeing a lot more hybrid, people doing some online work, talking online, meeting online, and then actually going to the dealership and making those purchases. So it could be a mix of both as well. Average transaction price of new cars jumped to $46,000 in August of this year, the highest it's ever been, and $10,000 above where it was 2 years ago. This summer, more than 65% of vehicles were sold above MSRP as compared to less than 10% in August of 2020. That's really been a change where there's not as much in the way in those incentives and not as much wiggle room when it comes to that price as there was in the past. And part of that's because there's so much demand for it. There might be a bunch of people waiting in line behind it if you are not interested in that vehicle. So taking a look at new vehicle average transaction price, this is a recent chart. So here we are looking at $48,000 for this year. Looking back 10 years ago, the chart does not go down to zero. So we're not talking about a $48,000 increase. But if you look all the way to the left side of the chart from Kelley Blue Book, you're looking at about $30,000 average price for a vehicle back in 2012. So that shows you where we've gone in the past 10 years. And you can see that section of the chart that represents that 2020, 2021 into 2022. We see a really, really sharp jump there, where in the past we saw some small waves in it, but we really did see a fairly sizable jump there. I hint that things may be returning closer to normal. There's no guarantee, because there's no guarantee on a lot of things. But I don't know if you've noticed. I've noticed, especially in the past week, tuning in for the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, seeing some of the other holiday items on TV. We're starting to see new car ads again popping back up. And new car ads have been few and far between over the past couple of years. 2020 into 2021, when they really didn't have vehicles on a lot of the dealership lots, there was no point in advertising if you couldn't sell them a new car. So a lot of them pivoted to, we'll buy your used car, bring it by, let us take a look at it. But to actually see new car ads, that's been kind of a rare thing as of recently. So what's changed since 2019? And 2019 is not a year that is anything magical. It's just really the last year that we can look at pre-pandemic things. So anything since then has been affected by the pandemic and the ripple effects from the pandemic. So we look at 2019, where we were, and now where we are into 2022. Vehicle manufacturer incentives have dropped by almost 75% since 2020. The manufacturers and the dealerships don't have to do as much because there are people waiting in line to try and get some of these vehicles. So it's not a big surprise that some of these incentives have gone away the way that they have. Why are cars so much more expensive? Well, the chip shortage, which is finally, as we mentioned, showing some signs of subsiding a bit, meant low inventories and high demand. We talk about this with gas prices as well. That's something else that I track. When you have low supply and high demand, prices are high. The same thing with vehicles. And that's where we've been over the past year and a half. What's all this mean? Well, you're likely going to be paying more for a car now than even what you were paying just a few years ago. Even if it's a similar make, similar model, it probably has some newer features on it that your one from 2015, 2016 didn't have on it. But the price could be substantially higher than you remember it, and substantially higher than maybe what you were planning for. So those are all things to focus on as you're starting to do some of that research. And if you are doing that research, we encourage that, because the well-informed buyer who's done a lot of their homework and the research is really in the best position. Great place to start with this. Okay, I'm a little biased because I'm the AAA guy, but we put out a resource for car buyers every year. Go to newsroom.aaa.com, search the 2022 car guide. You can look at a digital version of it. If you'd like to have a paper copy, it's really cool. It's a magazine form, really great looking. You can stop by any AAA location. They should have some on hand for you. But the 2022 car guide really goes through all the different vehicles out there, what you're looking for, what it's going to cost you to probably buy that vehicle, although there are regional differences price-wise, what it could cost you to maintain and take care of that vehicle over the first few years and then over the length of time for it. But it really does give you some perspective on trim levels and other things with that vehicle, and can help you maybe decide between it, because you can also take a look at vehicles that are similar to each other from different manufacturers to see, well, maybe I can't get this vehicle, but here's something similar. How do I feel about that? And it'll help you compare all the different accessories and everything else with it and look at some of those ratings on there. So take a look at that. It can help you with the planning phase and getting moving on thinking about where you're going. So one of the important things to think about as you're starting to look around to buy a new car or a used car is thinking about, what do you do with the vehicle that you have right now? And in the past, a lot of times it was a bit of an afterthought. Oh, I'll trade it in. They'll give me a couple of $1,000s for it. That may not be the place that you're in now. That used car may have a lot more value in it than you realize. It may now be worth more than it was 2 years ago, even with more miles on it, because of the shortage of well-maintained used cars out there. I had a friend here in Virginia in 2020 that bought a used car from one of the rental car companies. And it was a Toyota 4Runner, and he got a pretty good deal on it, right around $30,000, a couple of years on it, a couple of miles on it, but got a great deal on the vehicle and was very happy with it. A year and a half later, they were looking for another vehicle for the family because he had a son who was starting to drive. So they were looking around. He had driven that vehicle, but wasn't planning to trade that vehicle in at all. But the dealership saw him pull up and they're like, "Hey, sir, can we talk to you about your car?" And he was like, "Well, I came to talk to you guys about a new car." And they ended up talking to him. He had done very minimal work to the vehicle. He'd done some add-ons to the wheels, but it was almost a net cost of zero because he sold the old wheels for about the same price that he had done. But he'd put, I guess, 12, 13,000 miles on it over the year and a half that he had owned it. But that vehicle, when the dealership came and offered him, was about $8,000 or $9,000 more than he had paid for it, even with more miles on it. And he was shocked because that's just not the way that things are or were pre-pandemic, because your vehicle would start to depreciate to the point where there wasn't a lot of value down the road on it. Or if there was some value, it was less than what you paid for it. So he stood there with his mouth open like, okay, let's talk about trading this vehicle in because there's a lot more money in this vehicle than I thought. That same thing could be with you as well. How much money do I have in my vehicle? Well, doing regular maintenance, having copies of the work that was done as proof for a potential buyer, that's really, really important. Fixing any wear and tear damage, if it's feasible, if it's something that's above you or it's going to be very, very expensive, maybe that's not worthwhile, but something to check in. Washing, cleaning, maintaining that appearance. Potential buyers read a lot sometimes in that first look. So getting it cleaned up, making sure that anything that's kind of personal inside of it, kids' toys, all those things are out of it if you're showing it to somebody. And it comes down to, are you selling it yourself? Are you trading it in? There are a lot of places that you can go on it, and it kind of depends on, how much work you want to do, how much time you've got to invest in it, and how much you think you might be able to get out of it. So some pre-work for selling or trading your current vehicle. Do your homework to determine your vehicle's wholesale market value. Well, what is that? TrueCar.com, NADA's official used car guide, and Kelley Blue Book can all help you come up with an estimate, and they give you a range because there's no one die-hard fixed number that you're definitely worth this. But they'll give you a range that you're targeting for pretty much what you think that vehicle is worth. If you're trading it in, dealers used to lowball sellers because there wasn't much turnaround value with those vehicles, but they could use it to help you get the money down on the new car that you were buying. And for the most part, I think a lot of people have been there before. I know I've done it. I turned in a used SUV and got a couple $1,000s off of it, knowing that it was close to the end of its life, and that was that. These days, though, dealers are paying a lot more money for vehicles because of the shortage of used cars. When they couldn't sell new cars, they were looking for gently used, well-maintained used vehicles. So there was just a lot more value in those vehicles than people realized. Now, the flip side of all of that is you don't want to let go of a vehicle that's working for you if you have to buy another vehicle out there because you're going to be paying higher price for that other vehicle out there as well. So it's that gentle balancing game where you've got to come up with what works best for you. But the good news is, whether you decide to trade it in or sell it yourself, there's probably more value in that vehicle than you've realized. So run those numbers, take a look at it, see how much that vehicle is likely to be worth, be it a trade-in or a private sale. You can also take it to several used car lots, ask them what they'd pay for it, average those offers, add 10% to come up with your number as you're talking to dealers about trading it in. You may not get that number, but it's a great starting point and kind of gives you a place to move from as you're trying to get the price on your new vehicle down. According to J.D. Power, the estimated trade-in value for October, about $9,200, which is more than double the pre-pandemic average for a used vehicle. So all great things to think about as you're looking at ways to buy a new car and save some money on that new car. So selling privately, that can be more work on you to market the vehicle and show it to potential buyers and be concerned about how money's trading hands and doing everything like that, trading the title, transferring the title, all those kinds of things. So you do have to deal with all of that on your own. Not the worst thing in the world, but it may have been a while since you've done that. So kind of a good time period to refresh yourself. What's the best way to accept money for a vehicle where I'm guaranteed that that money is there? Know the lowest value you're willing to take and stick to it as you negotiate, because people are looking for deals. They're probably going to say, hey, I'd like the vehicle, but I'd like to have it for this price. If you can't let it go at that price, maybe hold on to it. There could be more people out there interested in it than you know, especially, and I can speak to this as the parent of a 16-year-old driver. Regularly, I hear from friends and neighbors who have kids who are around that same age and trying to find vehicles for a teenager for their first vehicle. It's been tough. So there may be more of a marketplace out there than you realize for that used car of yours. So know the value and what you want to get out of it and stick to it and see what you can get. So budgeting for a new or used car, how do I do that? Maybe you didn't spend some money during the pandemic. Maybe you've got it set aside and you're hoping to use that for your car purchase. Great news. Here is the 24-10 rule. You can see it on screen there, 24-10. So buying that car, and I've got a misspelling right there on my graphic. Boy, I should have proofread that a little bit better today. Put down at least 20% of the total purchase price. 20% of the total purchase price to try and bring that price down for you. Financing, here's the 4 years or less. Keep your monthly vehicle expenses, the car payments, the insurance, registration, fuel maintenance, all of that to about 10% or less of your monthly take-home pay. So running through that 24-10 will help you keep that price in your range so that you're comfortable not just buying it, but also with those monthly payments, the insurance, everything else that comes along with it, because that's something to think about. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that coming up in a minute or so. Up front, that vehicle is expensive, but when you go to get that car tax bill, that's a lot more probably than your older car that's got a few miles on it. You're also probably going to be paying more on car insurance. Now, there are some benefits. You may get some discounts with car insurance and other things because of all the new fancy electronics on board that make the vehicle safer. Advanced driving assistance systems, the automatic braking, and some other things can help bring down some of those insurance prices. So that's a good thing. But just be aware, it's more than just the cost that you're signing on when you buy that vehicle. There's some other things that come with it. All things you need to think about to make sure that you can balance your budget like you need to. Now, to get help with getting those payments down, lenders will sometimes suggest longer loans, 60 months or more. It does offer lower payments, but you pay a lot more in interest. By the end, your car could be worth a lot less than you hope, and you could be paying for a lot longer time period. So something to think about. That's why it's important to stick to that 4 years or less for that loan if you can. So buying, here's some of those questions to ask yourself as you're thinking about a new car. And as you go through the list, you may be set on one answer, but when it comes down to actually buying the vehicle, you may flip-flop on it just because of availability out there. Do you want a new car or a used car? New cars, like we mentioned, very expensive, a lot more value in used cars, so maybe more expensive than you were expecting, but perhaps much closer to being in your range that you want to pay. So something to look at. It all comes down also to availability. If you're really dead set on a vehicle and they're just not getting that new vehicle in, maybe it's a gently used version of that vehicle from a couple of years ago. So really take that to heart and maybe make that a pivot as you're thinking about what you want to get out of that vehicle. Internal combustion or electric. A lot more people asking about electric vehicles as the world has changed with the pandemic. A lot more people working from home, not putting as many miles on their vehicles. They drive the kids to school, they run a couple of errands during the week, and then they travel on the weekends every once in a while. Does an electric vehicle work in your life there? That's one of those things to think about. EVs make up about 2% of all vehicles, but are expected to grow in market share as many automakers transition to all EV production for the future. So a lot of talk about that. Is this a time period for you to get into the EV market or at least look into it? Maybe it's time to check on that. Now, there are lots of questions out there about EV range, and the automakers are really focused on expanding the range that EVs can make. But don't forget, if you are somebody that likes to travel a lot, traveling with an electric vehicle includes a lot more planning on not gas stops along the way, but making sure you have an electric vehicle port that you can hook up to and that you can spend the time there charging your vehicle, because it's longer than just a quick pit stop to put some gas in it and keep going on. So some things to think about if you're interested in some of the newer technology. So what kind of car do you want? Do you want a sedan? Do you want a small SUV? Do you need a larger SUV? Are you starting to think about a truck because you're doing a lot more things where you're loading things and towing things and moving things around? What kind of features do you want on the vehicle? What's most important to you? A lot of vehicles are coming with plenty of really neat, great safety accessories on them, backup cameras, things that weren't on vehicles just even a few years ago. Adaptive driving assistance systems. What kind of systems can you find on the vehicle? Recent research from AAA found that even some of the lower trim packages and some of the smaller economy, less expensive vehicles are starting to come with some of the really cool effects on them, as well as these driving assistance systems that can really help a driver in a situation, be it auto braking or telling you to stay in your lane, or adaptive cruise control, where it actually keeps you 3 car lengths from the vehicle in front of you. Instead of just saying, all right, you're going to be doing 65 miles per hour, it says, I will keep you 3 car lengths away from whatever's in front of you, depending on how fast they're going. All great things that can make a real difference when you're driving. So are some of these new features important to you? What vehicles have these new features? Word of note, as our AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety has researched, there is a lot that goes into the name from a marketing side of things that can really be confusing for drivers as to how engaged and how much the system on board that vehicle can do for you. So understand what your feature is, how it works, how you can turn it on, how you can turn it off, and what it can really do. No, this doesn't automatically brake for you, but it does sound an alarm to tell you to brake. Oh, okay, I understand that. That should be a question for the salesperson or a call to the manufacturer to say, can you explain this to me? Especially if there's some confusion with what it says in the driver's manual. But going all through those and understanding what you have is really important. How much are you willing to pay? There's got to be a top end. Nobody loves to think about the top end, but you got to have a top end on things to know what you can afford. And not just, as we talked about at that moment, but down the road as well. No pun intended. A car is a long-term purchase, not just for the price, but when it comes to maintenance and insurance and registration and car tax and all those other things. So understand how all those costs play in and what it's going to cost for you. Check that Carfax for vehicle history. Was the vehicle in a crash? Is there something from the past that you should be concerned about? We talked a lot about natural disasters and what they can do to vehicles. So many vehicles we saw in the video from Florida with Hurricane Ian, especially on the Fort Myers area, Sanibel, Captiva, those areas where cars were just floating. Those should be taken out of inventory and should not be resold, but there are times when those vehicles get back into there, and they should be marked on Carfax as having been taken out of inventory because they were flooded. And you really, really want to be concerned about any vehicle that shows flooding. There are so many different wires and connectors and computers inside of our vehicles today that flooding and water in those vehicles is a huge, huge problem, especially down the road as some of those things start to wear out very, very quickly and can be very, very expensive to start replacing. You do not want to be in that situation. So checking that Carfax very carefully. Also check for open recalls on a vehicle. It might make it dangerous to drive. Takata airbags were a real big issue over the past couple of years. A lot of vehicles out there with recalled bags that had never been taken care of. So look into that, understand what you're getting, see if there's anything with the vehicle that's a threat to you driving it. And those Takata airbags were an issue. I had a Honda at one point that actually had to park for a period of time until they could get a replacement Takata airbag because it was dangerous to be in that vehicle. Getting pre-approved for the loan, doing your homework on how much you think you need and how much you can reasonably afford in a down payment and in those monthly payments. Understand your interest rate, understand how much it's going to cost you over the long term. Having that pre-approval gives you some bargaining power with the dealership, but something else to do, the dealership may have some connections and offer you some other financing or offer you some incentives through financing. Do your homework, compare what you've gotten pre-approved for, what you might be offered to see if there's a better deal between the two. So all things that you can look into as you're preparing to buy that vehicle. All right, a lot of talk about this one. We see a lot of companies that are advertising that you can buy a car sight unseen, which is okay. There are some people out there that want to do that, and that's your prerogative. But we would recommend you take that test drive, and maybe you're test driving at one area and you end up buying it from another area. That's great. That might work well for you. Don't skip the test drive, though. Here's why. It lets you see if the driver's seat and the cockpit are comfortable and to see if the cabin's too noisy at speeds. It gives you a real good feel about the vehicle you're buying. I don't know if you've ever had the situation where you've been interested in a car and then you kind of sit down in it and you think to yourself, wait, this vehicle doesn't really fit me. I'm not comfortable in this vehicle. And that's what that test drive does. It really lets you take the vehicle out and try it out. Is the ride smooth? Is it a little bit jarring? Does the engine switch and shift gears real strangely? Is this something that you're okay with, or is it something you're concerned about? Drive the vehicle like you would in a real world situation, just like you're driving to work. So drive it on the neighborhood roads, take it out to the parkway, get on the highways, get a good feel for the vehicle at all the different speeds and driving environments out there for you. So test it on all of those. And for those that say, I still don't know if I want to go to the dealership, a lot of dealerships, if you give them a call and say, hey, I'm interested in driving this vehicle, I'm thinking about buying one of them, would you bring one over to me to the house and let me take it for a test drive? Chances are they're going to see, sure, if you've got your driver's license and your proof of insurance, scan them, take a picture of them, send them to me, and I'll be over there in an hour and we'll let you take it for a drive. There's so many more options than in the past about being able to do that. And some of that comes from us living in the virtual world. So, making a connection on the phone or reaching out through email or through a dealer's website, there's an awful lot you can do beforehand where you may not even have to step foot in there initially and go through that process if that's something that you don't enjoy doing. So looking around, we're talking about tight inventories. We're talking about them not having every vehicle out there. Maybe they don't have it at the trim package. Maybe they don't have it in the color you want. Have you thought about expanding your search? There's nothing to say you can't drive an hour and a half. Maybe even call ahead, ask them if they have something on their lot that's similar or close to what you're looking at, and start to have that conversation before you even drive out there. What kind of price are we looking at? How much can you get me out the door for? What are the terms on all of that? But expand your search. Don't just keep it focused on what's right in front of you. With inventories the way they are, the bigger that you look, the better off you might have the chance of finding something that's much closer to what you were imagining. So it might even be worth a dealership drive outside of your area if you really are dead set on some of those accessories, some of the trim levels, and some of the other things with those vehicles. So what to bring with you to the dealership? It's always a good question. So make sure you got that driver's license. Make sure you've got that payment method, although that's a discussion point with the salesperson or whoever you're working with. And you got that proof of car insurance with you as well. And if you're thinking of financing on the spot, well, bring in your pre-approval letter if you've got something. But if you're thinking about seeing if there's a better deal through the dealership or another way to finance it, you want to make sure you bring in a credit report with you, bring in a pay stub or proof of employment, and bring some of your bank statements with you as well. So you've got all those different things that you can show off and see it right there. Something we talked about a little while ago, but it's much more important when we're talking about this, the big picture. It's not just the price that you're paying that day as you leave the lot, because that's just the beginning of all of it. Understand the full cost of ownership. New cars mean less maintenance than an older vehicle. That's some good news, but you'll pay much higher insurance up front. Also higher car tax. Personal property taxes are higher for those cars. Don't let that be a surprise bill down the road. It might be worth a call to your insurance company before you ever even leave to go out to the dealership to say, hey, I'm considering buying a 2022 or a 2023, this vehicle at this level with this trim package and this sized engine in it. Roughly how much am I looking difference-wise for me to be able to insure myself and my spouse in this vehicle? And factor that in, because that's a part of all of it. That's the part that really can catch you down the road with a surprise bill when you're like, wow, I had no idea it was going to be so much more expensive. Work all those things out before you get to that point. So knowing a price range that the car is likely to cost, and you may find it higher than that. A lot of those incentives, like we mentioned, have gone by the wayside, and dealerships are charging a lot more because there's high demand for some of these vehicles. Look at the people who purchased vehicles back in 2021, waited 8 months for them to be built, and are now just getting those vehicles. That shows you sometimes what the wait time can look like for all those vehicles. So there's much higher demand, and that's leading to much higher prices. Kelley Blue Book will give you a good idea on how much a vehicle should cost, but understand there could be regional differences. There could be some unusual factors and effects. So look at that price, but see where you are once you've gotten to the dealership with some of those prices. As we mentioned, dealerships have been getting well over MSRP on vehicles because of high demand. If the price is going to be too far above your comfort zone and what that price range should be, that could be an indicator that you need to wait out the market some more. And there is the expectation that the market is starting to return to normal. How long is it going to take us to get there? We don't know, but it's starting to return to normal. But if you really want to see if that price is going to come back down to somewhere closer to what you would expect or somewhere closer to what you would like to pay for it, maybe it's some time to sit it out, wait it out, and see where prices go in the near future. Keep in touch with the dealership. Dealerships understand that sometimes they're not going to make a sale right away, but they'd be glad to talk to you if they're getting more cars in down the road and saying, hey, we just got in 8 of those vehicles. We'd only gotten 8 in over the past 8 months, but we've got 8 in right now. We really want to move them off the lot. Maybe we can get you closer to that price. Keeping in touch with that dealership and that salesperson might make a difference for you in the future as we get back closer to normal. And I know my camera's locked up and you can't see me air quoting normal. I'm not totally sure what normal looks like, but that's what we're aiming for. New car inventories are up, but hot selling popular vehicles still in short supply. So some of those people who were unable to buy a vehicle in 2021 because there weren't new vehicles on the lot, they've probably deferred that vehicle purchase. So they might already be in contact with the dealership. And as soon as some of these vehicles come in, they're racing over there to take a look at them and buy them. So even though there's more of them coming in, there could also be unusual demand because of everything that we've been through over the past 6 to 8 months to the past year, waiting on some of these vehicle manufacturers to catch up on some of these popular vehicles. For some vehicles, it still may be a build the car you want and wait for it to be manufactured. A lot of people don't like that idea, but if you really want the vehicle at the price you're looking at, that might be the best way. Understanding though, you may have to wait 5-6 months for it to be built or even longer than that. But have that discussion with the dealership and the salesperson and see what can be done. So at the negotiating table, when you're getting down to it, what are we talking about? Ask for cost breakdowns if they provide you one big number. Is it the final number, or have other costs and fees not yet been added in? One of the best ways to ask about that is, what's the walkaway figure? How much am I paying at the end of the day today with everything factored in and me pulling out my checkbook or me pulling out my credit card? How much am I paying? What's the final price? Ask all those questions before you're signing paperwork. Don't be afraid to walk away if it's not where you want it to be. It could be part of another discussion to get it down there. Maybe there's another dealer nearby that can hit the number you're looking for, has a similar vehicle, similar trim model, and can get you much closer. Don't be afraid to reach out to them. You're not tied to that vehicle until you've signed for it. If it's not that price that you want, maybe it's the time to walk away and see what else is out there. Prepare for a very long process, and I don't think this is a surprise to anybody that's purchased a vehicle. It can be a trying process. There's a lot to it, a lot of paperwork, a lot of discussion points, a lot of different things you're signing for, DMV paperwork, all those different things. If you aren't really up for that, maybe you know what kind of vehicle you want, you really just want to get the vehicle, maybe it's time to reach out for the online buying process and try that out. It may be a long time period too, but you can do it from the comfort of your own home. But again, understand what you're paying for, understand what you're agreeing to, and what you get at the end of the day. Read through everything carefully as you're signing, understanding what you are agreeing to buy. Very important thing. So some resources that could help you out. AAA.com. We actually offer a car buying assistance program for members through TrueCar. It includes special member pricing, incentives, and access to a large network of dealers and online inventory out there where they can look at cars not just in your neighborhood, but around the corner, up the street, and help you connect with that vehicle that you might really want. That might be a great way for you to be able to expand your search without you having to go through all those different spots as well. Carfax.com, as we mentioned, can help you out, understand what that vehicle's been through, what you need to know about that vehicle. KBB.com, Kelley Blue Book, that gives you a good idea of how much that vehicle is, how much you should be paying for it, how much your vehicle is worth, and a place to start the discussion. And then again, our 2022 AAA Car Guide, newsroom.aaa.com, and search for the car guide there. And we've come to the end of it. So I thank you for listening to me. That's my email address if you have any questions or if you want to send me an email to talk about some things. Also wanted to mention it as we're kind of hanging out here. If you're interested in becoming a AAA member, we talked about maintenance on vehicles, or maybe you want to give it as a gift. A lot of people do. Here's some information. New members, you can use discount code SAFETYNEW. It's right there on the screen. Returning members, we have the discount code SAFETY. You can go to AAA.com/membership. And punch in those codes and get you a discount. Maybe it's for you, maybe it's a gift for someone else. It's that peace of mind in their wallet that if something does happen along the roadside, there'll be someone to come and get them. So thank you all for having me here this evening. I've enjoyed talking to you. I hope you've learned something from it. And if there are any questions out there, I'm very happy to try and answer them. I don't pretend to know the answer to all of them, but I'm happy to chat and see what we can talk about.